Take your Bibles. We continue our study of James. We're in James chapter 3. Looks like some folks forgot to set their clock ahead. As we look out, we have several folks missing the day. They must have forgotten to change that time. Good thing is it gets light, or stays light, later in the day. The bad thing is for those of us like me that get up at 5 every morning, it stays darker a whole lot longer too. So anyway, it is daylight savings time, and I don't know what we're going to save with it, but we are glad you are here. And I am still a little nervous about this blinking light over here. This video stuff is new to us, and I've been doing this for 25 years, and the thought of that camera on me just terrifies me a little bit. But we're going to work through it, because we're actually having people watch us on the internet. They're watching us. We had 19 people the week before last, and last week's didn't do so well. It wasn't watchable, so I didn't leave it up there. It wasn't a sufficient quality. But we're reaching people that we never thought we would be able to reach through the technological marvels that we have today. So you keep that in prayer. Another thing I want you to remember in prayer is we need a pianist. There's so much more we could do with our music service if we had someone live over there to keep us on track. So you keep that as a matter of prayer. We're talking about getting smart today. In fact, the sermon is called Get Your Smarts Here. Yes, I know that's bad English. James chapter 3, beginning with verse 13. It says, "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. The wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but it is earthly, natural, and demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing rather. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." Now, there was this airplane flight, and on this airplane there were a minister, a Boy Scout, and a computer expert. The pilot came back to the cabin and he said the plane was going down. He said, "Unfortunately, we only have 3 parachutes, and there's 4 people." The pilot said, "I need one of these parachutes because I have 3 small children at home." So he took the parachute and he jumped. The computer whiz, he said, "Well, I am one of the smartest men in the world, and I need this parachute. The world needs me." So he took a parachute and he jumped. The preacher turned to the Boy Scout, and with a very sad smile, he said, "You're young, and I have lived a rich life. Please take the remaining parachute, and I'll go down with the plane." The Boy Scout said, "Relax, Reverend. The smartest man in the world just picked up my backpack and jumped out." We live in an age of information. Information is available to us literally at the click of a button. You can find out things about things you never wanted to know about. And you can see things you never wanted to see. In fact, there are some things you just simply cannot unsee. Information that used to be available only to a privileged few is now available to anybody with very little effort. But just because we have knowledge at our fingertips does not mean we have wisdom. In fact, sometimes it doesn't even come close. Along with the flood of information that we get, it seems that we've lost what used to be called street smarts. We have a cornucopia of book smarts available, but it's not showing up in our lives. Common sense. This is an obituary for common sense. Common sense lived a long life, but he died from heart failure at the brink of the millennium. No one knows how old common sense was. His birth records were long ago entangled in miles and miles of bureaucratic red tape. He was known affectionately to his good friends as horse sense and sound thinking. He selflessly devoted himself to a life of service in homes and schools and hospitals and offices, helping folks get their jobs done without a lot of fanfare, hooping and hollering. Rules and petty regulations and frivolous lawsuits held no power over common sense. A most reliable sage, he was credited with cultivating the ability to know when to come in out of the rain. The discovery that the early bird gets the worm, and how to take the bitter along with the sweet. Common sense us also developed sound financial policies, like a very simple one: don't spend more than you earn. Reliable parenting strategies, like the adults in charge, not the kid. And prudent dietary plans. If you're going to eat the bacon and eggs, have a little juice with them. He was a veteran of the Industrial Revolution, the Great Depression, the Technological Revolution, and the Smoking Crusades. Common sense survived sundry cultural and educational trends. Common sense survived disco, people. He survived the men's movement, body piercing, new math. Common sense's health began to decline in the late 1960s when it became infected with a virus called, if it feels good, do it. In the following decades, his strength proved no match for the ravages of overbearing federal and state regulations and an oppressive tax code. Common sense was sapped of his strength and the will to live as the Ten Commandments became contraband. Criminals received better treatment than victims, and judges stuck their noses in everything from Boy Scouts to professional baseball. His deterioration accelerated as schools implemented zero-tolerance policies. Reports of a 6-year-old boy charged with sexual harassment for kissing a classmate, a teen suspended for taking a swig of Scope mouthwash after lunch, and girls suspended for having Midol, and an honor student expelled for possessing a table knife in her lunchbox. This was more than common sense could endure. As the end neared, doctors said that common sense drifted in and out of logic, but was kept informed of developments like mandatory airbags and regulations of low-flow toilets. Finally, upon hearing about a government plan to ban inhalers from 1,400 asthmatics because of a trace of a pollutant that may harm the environment, he gave up. He's survived by 2 stepbrothers, half-wit and dim-wit. Memorial contributions may be sent to the Institute for Rational Thought. Farewell, common sense. May you rest in peace. Now, that humorous article was written by Lord Boardman of the Indianapolis Star. Maybe it's time we bring common sense back into our life. Maybe it's time we bring it back into our daily actions. Maybe it's time we bring common sense back into our worship. We've got all of these ideas about how worship ought to be and what we ought to do when we come to church. And the truth of the matter is, if we're not reaching people in the community, if we're not reaching people for Christ, if we're not doing what God told us to do, we're just wasting our time. We have a whole lot of knowledge, but it doesn't mean anything. What matters is how we take the knowledge that we have and how we use it. James, as we have learned throughout the book, is all about doing. Doing, doing, doing. James says, get off your behind and do what you say you're going to do. He's pretty blunt about it. Real wisdom is pure. James tells us there are 2 kinds of wisdom. There is a worldly wisdom, prone to error, and there is a wisdom that comes from God. An example of this worldly wisdom, I ran this sermon through a new online tool. I thought it was, I basically just want to play with it. It's an online grammar checking tool that just gives you every instance of everything that's wrong. And every time this word worldly came up, it flagged it and said it was an inappropriate word. Every single time. That's worldly wisdom. And then there's that wisdom that comes from God. Now, we may not all have the right kind of learning. My aunt, when she was a young woman, she was an epileptic. And because she was an epileptic, they didn't know much about it at the time. They wouldn't let her go to school. In fact, some people said she was demon-possessed because she had this really common disease, this brain disorder. As an adult, she decided she needed to learn to read. And she didn't care what others said about it, so she set out to teach herself to read. And after she taught herself to read, she began to teach classes to adults who had learning disabilities to teach them how to read. And she said over and over again, one of the greatest freedoms that she experienced was to be able to read. I think education is important, folks. I think you ought to, those who are young enough to be in school, you ought to stay in school. Those of you who are past that age and you have the opportunity to go back, go back. Learn every day. Learn something new every day. I challenge you this week to make it an effort to learn something new every day this week. It will stretch your mind, increase your imagination, and God will use that. There's nothing wrong with possessing knowledge, even if it comes from the world. The ability to drive in traffic on Interstate 4 is not a godly ability. It is a worldly ability. And it really tests your godly patience, I'll tell you that. But it's still a handy skill to have. Because the way people drive today, if you're not watching out for them, you're out of luck. Because I guarantee you they're not watching out for you. Worldly knowledge is necessary for our existence. Many Christian groups, particularly traditional Baptist congregations, take a dim view of institutional learning. We used to pride ourselves, and I don't understand why we used to pride ourselves on this, but Baptists used to pride ourselves like, 80% of our pastors have no formal training. Well, that's not great. That's not something to be proud of. Now, what they were trying to say was that our ministers get their training from God. That is great. That is fantastic. But there's nothing wrong with having an education. I was in high school, I was valedictorian. I was that smart kid everybody loved to hate. I was the one that ruined the bell curve for everybody. And then I went to college. And I found out things were a whole lot different at college. It took me 5.5 years to finish my 4 years of college. And then it took me another 10 years to get my master's degree. And it took another 9 years on top of that to get my doctorate. That's something most people are finished with by the time they're 27. And every time I'd stop working on it. I'd say, I've got other things to do. Back in the back of my mind, I kept saying, I really need to finish this. And then that little thing on the other shoulder would say, you're already in a church. They like you. Why you got to keep working? Bottom line of it was I enjoy learning. And, I'm finished with my degrees now, and I keep thinking, I wonder what I could take now. I wonder what I could do now. The problem is, I don't have the funds to go on and continue any more education. But we can self-educate. We can learn. Learning is important. And James isn't teaching to stay away from worldly knowledge. That's not what he's saying. He's not teaching that we ought to avoid learning. He's teaching that we need to realize that there's more to wisdom than just knowing something. Anyone has the capability to acquire knowledge. Now, whether you can understand that knowledge is something else entirely. My children, when they were in high school, they'd bring math problems home. I'm like, you're going to have to go to somebody else. Don't look at me. If it's beyond 2 + 2 = 4, I'm out of luck. And they keep talking about this X. Find X. Well, it's not my problem that math can't keep up with his girlfriends. It's not my problem. But we've got to continue to keep learning. It's an endeavor worthy of pursuing. Learning is, of itself, just the activity of learning, worthwhile. But wisdom has something else added to it. There's an added component to being wise. Knowledge, forgive the pun, is all in your head. Now, my family says that a lot of what I have to say and think about is all in my head, but somehow I don't think they're being complimentary. Wisdom is a matter of the heart. Knowledge is in your head. Wisdom comes from your heart. A person who is truly wise will show their wisdom by what they do. In other words, it's one thing to know that the stove is hot, but if you keep touching the stove, then you're not very wise. The believer that continues on with the concept that when you know an action is sinful and you keep on doing it, that's not very wise. But the wisdom, verse 17, but the wisdom from above is first pure. Before anything else, wisdom from God is pure. Purity of heart leads toward purity of wisdom. God does not merely want us to act holy. God wants us to be holy. Get your smarts through the purity of your heart. James also teaches that real wisdom is peaceful. Verse 17 says, the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable. A quarrelsome person does not have true wisdom. You've all met that person, haven't you? The one that will argue with a signpost and expect it to argue back. A quarrelsome person doesn't have true wisdom. Some folks are just cantankerous. Some folks go out of their way to irritate another. They like it. They want to do it. They want to see if they can get up under your skin. That's not a characteristic of wisdom. Eventually, when you keep irritating someone and keep on, eventually they're going to strike back. And you might not like the results. I was talking to a guy that I work with, and he's a blustery kind of guy anyway. He was telling a story. He said, he said, I was arrested not so long ago at Chili's. I said, what in the world did you do to get arrested at Chili's? He said, I punched a guy out. Now we're talking about a 60-year-old man. I punched a guy out. Okay, why did you punch a guy out? Well, it turns out that he was with his daughter, and she was walking a little ahead of him, and the guy at Chili's made an inappropriate move toward her. He touched her inappropriately. And so without saying anything, he just walked up to the guy that touched his daughter and punched him out. Knocked him flat out on the ground. And you might say, well, good for him. But the consequences were the police were called and he got arrested. Now eventually the charges were dropped and all of that. But how many times do we do something, say something, complete some kind of action on the spur of the moment without even thinking about what the consequences are going to be? We must remember that we're to be peacemakers. Now, I've got to be honest, had the same thing occurred. Well, first of all, I wouldn't have had to punch out the guy. My daughters would have left them limping just on their own. They wouldn't have needed me, but I probably would have done the same thing. Probably would have regretted it later. Or not. That's where the human part comes in. But we're supposed to be peacemakers. We're supposed to go out of our way to avoid an argument. Instead of looking for trouble, we're supposed to go out of our way to avoid it. Proverbs 23 says, avoiding a fight is a mark of honor. Only fools insist on quarreling. A wise man learns by the experience of others. One of the things I tell my children is don't do such and such because I've already done it and it doesn't work. You know what they usually do? They do it anyway. They don't want to hear what some old guy has to say about what they ought to do and ought not do. It doesn't matter that I've experienced the same things they have. What do I know? I'm only the father. Now, to be fair, I was like that too when I was a young adult. In fact, like most teenagers, when I was a teenager, I thought my parents didn't know anything. I've come to realize over the years that for the most part, they knew a little bit more than I did. Okay, maybe a lot bit more than I did. And that is wisdom. Knowledge and wisdom, again, are not the same thing. An ordinary man learns by his own experience. A fool learns by nobody's experience. Stories told about this guy who went to the therapist and was told that the way to achieve true inner peace is to finish what they started. Well, I thought that was a great idea. So far today, I finished 2 bags of chips and a chocolate cake. I feel better already. True wisdom, true smarts, comes through peace. This verse 17 also says that real wisdom is considerate. The wisdom from above comes from first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable. You ever met someone that just wasn't reasonable? Goes back to that idea of common sense too, by the way. People say some of the things that are just, they make you smack yourself upside the head and say, what? Really, you want to smack them upside the head and say, what? People say the silliest thing. It's like, someone said the other day, I was complaining about gas prices. They said, well, just don't drive. I said, okay, I go 50 miles a day doing my rounds for work, and you want me to just not drive? That makes no sense. We've got to come up with another answer. People have no common sense these days. Real wisdom involves this thinking and reasonableness and considerate thought. One of the things that we should do very well as a church, not just this church, but every church, one thing that the Church of Christ ought to be able to do very well is care for others. That should be in our wheelhouse, so to speak. Caring for others should be second nature. In January 1988, Time magazine wrote this article, and they were talking about selfishness. And in this discussion, in this article about selfishness, they told the story about the introduction of the video cassette recorder. Now, I talk to people today who have never even seen one. All right? Everything's DVD. And the funniest thing is when you start talking about a cassette tape, people look at you like you've lost your mind. What is that? And then when I tell them I used to have a reel-to-reel and an 8-track, then they really, then they just call me old. But when the video cassette recorder was first introduced, it was a big deal. The company made a crucial mistake. Sony did. Sony kept its beta technology to itself. JVC, who invented the VHS format, did something different. They took their secret formula for creating the VHS tape and they gave it away to other firms. As a result, the market was overwhelmed by VHS tapes, and who even remembers a Sony Betamax? Sony kept it to themselves, and because of that, they lost. The first year, Sony lost 40% of its market. And by 1987, Sony had abandoned beta and jumped on the VHS bandwagon. Now, by the way, Sony still makes beta video cassette recorders. I don't know why, but apparently somebody still uses them somewhere. But they still make them. Now, beta was a better quality medium. It was a better technology. But it lost because Sony wanted to keep it all to itself. And selfishness was the end of that technology for them. Now, how do we apply that to our life? We sometimes get selfish. How many of you had to learn to be selfish? Or did you just pick that up naturally? Children have one word that they're very good at, and that's mine. Mine, 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 mine. They become teenagers, then everything is mine, mine, mine. And then become adults, and it's still mine, mine, mine. Because we, by nature, are selfish people. We had to learn to share. We had to learn to share our toys. We had to learn to share what we have. And today we still have to continually learn that lesson over and over and over again. The beginning of real wisdom in our hearts is being considered and sharing with others. Selfish motivation will not produce the desired results. It is not the wisest of moves. It may have made sense for Sony to hold on to that proprietary technology, but in the end it was far wiser to let other companies use it. The Christian faith is always, and always has been, and always will be about relationships. It begins with a relationship between you and the Father, a relationship between you and God, and it extends to relationships between you and other people, and the relationship that God would have you to have with other people. Jesus was all about people. He cared about people. He cared about their problems. He cared about what was going on in their life. And He tried His best to help them wherever He could. We must practice consideration for each other, and it will alleviate much of the tension that we have in our daily life. When we take the time to consider others first, we're looking outward instead of inward. And that's something we have to practice on a daily basis. Looking out for somebody else, taking care of somebody else's problem. Because what we most often want to do is we want to stand on our rights. And we have to say that our rights are being violated. And we need to worry less about what's happening to us and what's happening to everybody else. God's going to take care of us. He wants us to take care of people. Folks, we live in a time of hurting. And I keep seeing these reports over and over and over again on the news about how our economy is picking up and things are looking good. And I keep wondering where in the world these reporters are, because they're not where I am. Because I look around Daytona Beach and I see people hurting. I see 14% of the people unemployed. I see even more than that have just given up. They're saying, I don't even want to try anymore because I can't find work. Folks, people are hurting. And we've got to continue to find new ways to reach out to them, to say we care about them, to provide for them, to feed them, to clothe them. This week was a rough week. We ran out of money about Tuesday. But the thing that keeps coming back to me is I haven't missed a meal. I've got a roof over my head. Got gas in the car. Although there are a couple times I was wondering if I was going to do that. But it's there. I am so much better off than so many other people. God's blessed me. Some people don't have a meal today. Some people are sleeping out on a park bench today. Some people are facing losing everything that they worked their whole life for, through no fault of their own. There is a greater need for the church today than there ever has been. We can help. We might not can solve all of the problems, but we can certainly make people realize that they're loved. This church and other churches just like ours, we need to open up our arms and let the world know this is the place they can come to be accepted, to be welcomed, to be loved. Because real wisdom is merciful. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits. Showing mercy is reflecting the character of God in our lives. You see, God doesn't give us what we deserve. Instead, He shows mercy on us. A young lady was walking through the park one day, and she stopped to have her picture taken by a photographer. And she was very excited about the picture. And as she walked away, he gave her a Polaroid shot of it, and she looked at it in amazement. She turned back to the cameraman, and when she got back to the cameraman, she said, "This is just not right. This is not right. You have done me no justice." And the photographer looked at her and said, "Ma'am, you don't need justice. What you need is mercy." And that's where I am most of the time. That's how I feel when I look in the mirror. Wisdom is characterized by the showing of mercy to those around us. Now notice James says wisdom is full of not only mercy, but good fruits. What he means is that our actions will be full of good work. It doesn't mean anything for us to say, I have mercy on you, my child. Go and sin no more. When we have mercy on someone, we show it. We do something. Mercy is a kind word, a caring touch, a gentle encouragement. Mercy is giving others more than they deserve, just because God did it for us. Finally, real wisdom is sincere. You know what that means? It means you mean it. You ever had someone say something to you and you know good and well they didn't mean it? It's like when you go to the grocery store and you can tell the cashier's in a bad mood. And it happens, you know, folks have bad days. And she looks at you and she grimaces. And she says, have a nice day. And you know she didn't mean a word of it. What she really means is fall off the earth and die. That's what she really meant. Real wisdom is sincere. It says, verse 17, wisdom from above is peaceful, or pure, peaceful, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, and without hypocrisy. The world today says that Christians are hypocrites. You know why they say that? Because we are. That's why they say it. There's some truth to that. Not only must you begin with purity, you must apply wisdom without prejudice. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point long because it's a point that we took up a few weeks ago when we were looking in James chapter 2, where it says if you really want to keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself. You're doing right, but if you show favoritism, you sin and you're convicted by the law of the lawbreakers. Showing favoritism violates the royal law to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, we're all prejudiced. You say, oh, preacher, I'm not prejudiced. Yes, you are. You may not be prejudiced by what the world uses the word for today, but we're all prejudiced about one thing or another. I'm partial to redheads. That makes me prejudiced against blondes and brunettes because I have a favorite color, if you will. So that makes me prejudiced. Someone asked me the other day, well, it was Michelle Berto of Fox News. She said she was giving up sweets for Lent. And I said, I gave up asparagus for Lent. And she said, that doesn't sound much like a sacrifice. I said, well, it may not be a sacrifice to me, but I'm sharing the sacrifice with all those asparagus farmers. Our ideas about what is right, what is wrong, from our upbringing. I grew up in a deep south, rural, small town. So you get an idea what my upbringing was like. But I was also taught by godly relatives that I love everyone. No matter who they are, no matter what their social economic status, no matter what their race, no matter what their nationality, I was taught to love them. Now sometimes I fell in that, as I'm sure you do as well. But it ought to be something we strive to do. You know, there were two apples up in a tree one time, and they were looking down on the world, and the first apple said, look at all those silly people. Fighting and robbing and rioting. No one wants to get along with each other. Someday we apples will rule the world. And the second apple looked at the first one and said, well, which one of us? The reds or the greens? And that's how we are a little bit today. We want to decide who's better. And the truth is, in the eyes of God, we're all the same. We're all sinners. True wisdom comes from acknowledging that and realizing that we're all equal. Every one of us. We don't need special rights for this group or that group. We just need to treat everybody like they're important. If we treat everybody like they're important, then these special rights won't matter. But we've got it ingrained in us. We've got, the wagging finger syndrome. We always wag our finger at people. But when we're wagging our finger at people, we're really reflecting what we are ourselves. Let's get some smarts about us. Do we possess God's wisdom or the wisdom of man? God's wisdom is a little bit harder to attain. The Bible says that all wisdom comes from God. So this week, learn something. And then take what you learn, give it to God, and let Him bring wisdom down to you. James is a book about doing. It's an action book. Let's do it this week. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear most gracious Heavenly Father, we praise your name. We come before your throne of mercy, grateful for what you've done for us. Lord, sometimes we are not always as good about doing what we ought to do as we need to be. Sometimes we flat out go the opposite direction. Sometimes we just mess up altogether. And yet, like the prodigal son, you still say to us, I love you. I love you. I care about you. I'll take care of you. And Lord, help us to be like that with other people. Let us look at your majesty. In Jesus' name, amen. Stand together as we sing Majesty. Majesty. Unto Jesus be all glory, honor, and praise. Majesty, kingdom, authority, flow from His throne unto His own, His anthem praise. So exalt, lift up on high the name of Jesus. Magnify, come glorify, as Jesus the King. Majesty, worship His majesty. Jesus who died, now glorified, King of all kings. Majesty, worship His majesty. Jesus, be all glory, honor, and praise. Majesty, kingdom, authority, flow from His throne into His own, His anthem praise. So exalt, lift up on high the name of Jesus. Magnify, come glorify, Christ Jesus the King. Majesty, worship His majesty. Jesus who died, now glorified, King of all kings. Jesus who died, now glorified, King of all kings. Dear Lord, as we leave this place today, we ask that you will give us your blessing, that you will show to us the way to be